Lantern Rite is a yearly celebration in Genshin that, like, everybody waits for every year, and it's something that, like, has been building up over the years as well. It's generally been something to look forward to every year for, like, you know, festive vibes, fun atmosphere, that kind of thing. But this year, with the coming of Nogcry's, like, story finale and overall uptick in, like, writing quality, I want to take a look at this year's Lantern Rite through a critical lens by analyzing the story and, like, the pacing and all that stuff. This is a casual review of this year's Lantern Rite. Some things to note before we start. The expectations going into this Lantern Rite were high. Like I just said earlier, we came off the eve of a spectacular Archon Quest with Nogcry, and while I do have issues with that story in general that I will probably eventually release a review on, it was amazingly done. It was a major step up from the previous regions, even if I still prefer some things from previous stories. This makes my expectations for future Archon Quests high as well, but it also affected how I viewed this Lantern Rite story. My expectations for Genshin story overall are higher, so I may rate this Lantern Rite story lower than it actually is, because the events of the Archon Quest are still at the front of my mind. And, like, the way that Archon Quest presented was amazing, so it makes me feel like I have to look at stuff more critically from now on, because HoYoverse proved they can do, like, stories well. They can do good come together and stuff like that, you know? Now, another thing to note, streaming. This may seem a bit off topic, but I feel like it's important to reference how streaming affected my experience with this Lantern Rite. I've been kind of on and off Genshin tubing for a while. When I was streaming, I started streaming, I believe, actually during late 2.8, during the Midsummer Island Adventure. Actually, no, whichever one it's called. The one with Kazuha and Shinya and Mona, whatever. And I've been there since, like, Sumeru, basically. I had a very small viewer base back then, like, only a couple people coming in and chatting, like maybe 2 or 3 viewers at most every stream. But now that I've started streaming on YouTube, I've gained quite a big audience, or way bigger than the audience I previously, like doubled in size, or no, like times 10 the size, really. And while I'm used to streaming to, like, lower counter viewers and just chatting with them basically, having to keep up with a 20 or 10 to 20 viewer chat every time and, like, keeping the conversations going there is kind of difficult to do while also paying attention to the story. So I was kind of talking with chat while I was playing through this Lantern Rite and trying to pay attention to the Lantern Rite. So I was kind of on and off for a little bit. And whether I maintained a good balance between reading chat and paying attention to the story on this one is kind of hard to say. In recompense to do this, I have an alt account and a main account. So I did the story on my alt account and decided off stream that I would do the main story, or the Lantern Rite story, on my main account later. And my opinions haven't changed that much, but it also could be that, my first impressions a bit changed because I, like, played through on stream is kind of semi-boring. I did play through it on my main account to get a more balanced opinion in a single playthrough, but none of my opinion really changed on this one. It was still kind of mid, in my opinion. Minigames. Well, I did phrase this, like, review in terms of a bit more of story. I do want to talk about the minigames in this Lantern Rite as a whole, so let's talk about them. The minigames this time were fine, with one standout minigame that I really enjoyed. Combat. Combat is pretty standard for Genshin events, so there's not a ton to talk about here. It was just fine. Outside of, like, combat-featured events with actual difficulty, most combat events aren't all that interesting, so not much to say about this one, really. The second fine-ish event was the side scroll one, where you pick up characters and go along the course. It wasn't that interesting, and it always feels like there's one of these in every major event where you go along a charted course. It's not offensive, but it's not really that fun either. The one minigame that actually surprised me this time was the Moonlight Adeptus Trail. It's sort of like a bullet hell gamey type thing, where you, like, run around and kill shit over time. It kind of reminds me of, like, Zenless's arcade games, and it's super fun, all things considered. It, like, made up for this minigames, or how mid the other minigames were. It was slightly bullet helly, as one of my chatters mentioned before I, like, knew what I was getting into, but it wasn't enough of a bullet hell to really turn me off either. It struck a nice balance between, like, being fun and semi-difficult. It was a nice thing to play through. If it wasn't in this Lantern Rite, though, I don't think I'd be talking about the minigames at all. I'd just be talking about the story, because otherwise the minigames would not be worth talking about whatsoever. Overall, I liked the Moonlight Adeptus Trail minigame, and was kind of neutral on the others. Miscellaneous. This is a sort of strange section among the minigames, but I wanted to talk about it even if briefly. These are the Prima Gem bundles you get by running around the map and attacking these little trees. It's a neat way to get the player to run around and see the world changed by Lantern Rite, in my opinion. And then there are playable characters you can talk to straight off the map. Again, a neat way to make the map feel alive. It's pretty cute. Humor. There was a lot of humor in this quest, like Zabai doing math and somehow calculating that the vendor owed us money if we brought a lot of tea, or her blessing Lu Shangshang by transferring the tea tree to where her baby tree was, saving her 2 years worth of time. But a lot of humor in this quest for me were jokes made by me and my chat along the way. I had a lot of fun making jokes with them and playing up certain personality quirks for laughs.
It's possible she has possessed someone and is meandering the bustling streets of Liyue Harbor as we speak.
She possessed Kujo Sara. You see her? She possessed Kujo Sara. I was gonna say, let's make Kujo Sara even less important than she usually is. And make her be possessed by fucking Zabai. Xiangling is just delusional as fuck in this quest. I think she's just delusional in general. I mean, she like puts slime bits in like her like foods. I don't think she's right in the head. She's kind of like, she's like happy-go-lucky, but like, I know people think Fischl's kind of crazy, but this one's like, this is the type of crazy that sneaks up on you when she's like okay with you throwing up in her food after dinner and eats it all, you know? In the end, I can't help but compare my experience to the 5.6 event quest's hilarity and how much fun that was. But I also feel like it's worth noting that the community experience I had probably made it more fun than if there weren't people to tell these jokes to or to play around with. So like that probably upped my experience with this Lantern Rite. Another thing worth talking about here, if only briefly, was the odd translations in the dialogue. There was like one scene like Act 2 that had like 3 in a row, and then there was none. It was very strange.
No idea. Maybe she ate a bad batch of perch stew? Sounds like she's a few perches short of a stew, if you know what I mean.
There were some poetic verses, but the word long gone popped up as well.
I don't know if there's like some new employee working on this or what, but there were some odd things happening for like 10 minutes. New guy was given 10 minutes to work on it. It turned out really weird. Atmosphere. While I talked about this a little in the minigame section, I feel like it's worth talking about the atmosphere of the quest itself. The quest didn't really feel like Lantern Rite to me, which is very unfortunate. Lantern Rite felt like more of a backdrop for Zabai's resurrection rather than a main event of celebration every year. A lot of focus was on Zabai because it's her banner, of course, but Lantern Rite did the background this year in favor of developing her character. There wasn't a ton of talk of Lantern Rite, more so like the White Horse Adeptus the entire time, and while there was plenty of characters about and we interacted with a lot of them throughout the quest, it didn't feel like much like a come together for Lantern Rite rather than cameos in the story. It just didn't feel like all that impactful in terms of the Lantern Rite thing. Now, let's go back a little. Before Nodcard dropped, HoYoverse stated that they would be taking an approach to integrate more story quests into the Archon Quests. And while it has worked for the most part, there were some stinkers, like Nefer's story quest being inserted to 6.1, and then the story flowing really unnaturally as a result. I think Zabai's kind of lackluster story is also probably a result of this, even if it's like her quest is not in the main story itself. If they're moving away from story quests a lot, they would have to find some way to integrate her story into the game, and they use Lantern Rite for it. The issue with this is the sort of unnatural way it's woven in, and how Lantern Rite felt way less important as a whole. I'm kind of the opinion they probably should have given Zabai a story quest instead. They could still make the backdrop Lantern Rite, but this way they could have given us the titular Lantern Rite story, while also giving us Zabai's story, and it would be better. Paralogism took a semi-similar approach with Windbloom festivities going on in the background, and its story worked pretty well in my opinion. The difference is that Paralogism wasn't 5.6 main event, so I didn't personally have an issue with there not being a big celebration going on. And its story didn't take away from, like, the event story, you know? Cutscenes. The cutscenes were good as always, but I did feel a distinct lack of emotion at them compared to how it usually goes. I had chills watching the first cutscene, and it was nice to see in the second cutscene that the words spoken to her are the same that we heard in the first cutscene. I didn't get chills in the second cutscene in comparison to the first. To make up for the lack of atmosphere, I think it would have been better to do this cutscene in 3D with all the characters chanting the words like at the start, and then go to individual characters like it does in that cutscene, then show her awakening and coming down to greet us from the sky. This is kind of a personal nitpick, of course, but I do think it would be better that way. Going back to the distinct lack of emotion point, I think the reason why I didn't feel as moved this time around was because of storytelling. I think the storytelling was okay for the most part here. Although I do have a couple gripes with it I think is worth talking about. Bloated dialogue. Genshin has always had this issue, but I think it's more exacerbated by Zhongli existing and quoting Chinese proverbs every 2 seconds he's on screen. I feel like it's definitely possible to cut out like an hour of dialogue and the story wouldn't change that much. And I would probably like the story way better as a result. There was so much dialogue the first time I played through, and I just felt tired by the end, so nothing really hit as hard. I liked what they were putting out for Zabai, but it was just way too much to sit through. When I was initially editing, like, the Lantern Rite stuff, and I was really gonna put like a condensed event thing in there like I did for 6.2 story, I was initially gonna sit through that, but then I realized it was fucking 8 hours of dialogue, even cutting out like the minigames. And that's fucking ridiculous. And I did all the dialogue again. I didn't like do any commentary. I just like sat through the dialogue, let it go. All the footage in total ended up to being about 4 hours and 15 minutes. And that's way too fucking long, man. There's only really one execution of a plotline that felt kind of in general though, and that was the third act. In it, we show Zabai around Liyue Harbor, and it just feels like we've seen it all before. We had it happen in the Liyue Archon Quest with like us getting gifts for like Zhongli's funeral or whatever, and that took up way too long too. We had something similar happen in Raiden's first story quest, where we showed her around the world, and it was also dog shit back then. Nothing about this one was any better than the other two, so it just bored me the whole time and also made the finale less impactful because you just sat through 30 minutes of nothing, all that fun the whole time. I think the most egregious parts of us showing her around Liyue was when we read the ancient poem about herself. It just felt like a slog to get through and didn't feel all that relevant, even though I was fine with the restaurant scene before then because it was kind of funny. In general, the biggest issue was always dialogue bloat, and it always turns semi-decent stories into bad things to play through. Then there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that's the after quest that happens after Act 3. In total, that after quest took about an hour to complete, which feels kind of ridiculous to me. It's like an epilogue of sorts of Zabai's story, and it taking up a 4-hour quest, that's all of that together, it should have been like 30 minutes max. It should not be an hour to get through all that shit. Even if I did have more fun with that one, I feel like they could definitely cut down that shit and it would not matter as much. They could still keep the Zabai counting and like trying to extort that one guy and Lu Shangshang playing a tree, but otherwise nothing else should have been there. We should not have to sit through an hour of that bullshit, man. Heaven's Star was an important lore drop and I think that could still be included somewhere, but like, at that point, I was so fucking tired of playing through that quest, man. It was just, I felt so bored the entire time and didn't really care, even if it was a big lore drop for everybody that really does care about that, and I do. It just felt like a waste of my time. I still liked this Lantern Rite overall, and it wasn't the worst thing ever, but the story definitely could use some work after the amazing Archon Quest that just came out in comparison. It was an okay story quest, but didn't work for a Lantern Rite story, but I do think the humor for this quest was quite nice. Like I said, this is a bit of a casual review, and this is my first time doing a review of this nature, so we'll see if I can do something like this in the future as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.